The Ghost Hound of Goshen Hill. On Buncombe Road, between Ebenezer Church in Newberry County and Goshen Hill in Union County in South Carolina, there lurks a strange beast, known as the Ghost Hound of Goshen. It has been witnessed by many reputable people. Some say it's the dog of a peddler falsely accused of murder and hanged. Whatever the case, the dog is known to chase those who trespass on its territory. But don't worry, it's never caught anyone that we know of. Some say the hound was in life a pet of a peddler, making his way across the area in the early 1850s. Unfortunately for the man, a murder occurred while he was passing through and he was the scapegoat. After a sham of a trial, the man was hanged. His faithful dog stayed by his grave until either starvations or stones thrown by the townfolk ended its life. It was after that the ghost hound was seen. The earliest sighting of this hound happened in 1855. William Hardy sent a young slave to the home of Dr. George Douglas to bring the doctor back to look at a sick man. When the boy arrived at the home of the doctor, he was terrified of something. After a while, the doctor had calmed the young slave enough to hear his story. It seems the boy was riding on a mule headed for the doctor's when he heard an awful noise coming from behind him. He described what he saw as the biggest, whitest dog he'd ever seen. Immediately, the boy dug his heels in the sides of the mule to hurry the animal along. As they ran for all they were worth, the dog got in front of the mule, causing it to rear up, almost throwing the boy off. The boy then said the dog just stared at him. It never left the boy's trail until he turned to Dr. Douglas's yard. Dismissing the boy's story, Dr. Douglas told the boy to go home, only to have the child plead and beg to stay with the doctor for the night. Years later, Dr. Jim Cofield saw the animal. Try as he might, he was never able to give a rational answer for what he'd seen. Dr. Cofield even had a dog of his own who would walk alongside him when they went to Ebenezer Cemetery. Then, the dog would whine and disappear into the woods until the good doctor had passed the ghost's territory. Only then would he rejoin Cofield on the road. In 1936, Barry Sanders was making the trip home when he came face to face with the ghost hound. Over a mile from the safety of his home, Sanders ran the entire way, screaming. Only when he made it to the front door did the animal turn and head back into the woods. In the early 1970s, an elderly woman was said to have had an encounter with this dog when it came into her yard, grew in size, and leaped towards her. The woman fainted. When she awoke, the dog was nowhere to be found. The last sighting is said to have happened in 1998, but there's not very much information on this account. So, if you travel down Buncombe Road between Ebenezer Church and Goshen Hill, be sure to keep an eye out towards the woods, for the hound still watches and waits, ever ready to chase anyone from its territory. Hilton Head Island. Whether you believe in ghosts and spirits or not, this haunted hike in South Carolina may send you running for the hills. True believers will tell you, South Carolina has some pretty creepy hauntings. The history is long in South Carolina, so there's bound to be a few trapped spirits and energies here and there. Take a short hike through the ruins of Baynard Plantation after dusk on Hilton Head Island. Local lore surrounding the ruins says that in 1838, Saucy Jack Stoney lost his family's 1,000-acre plantation that had been in the family since his grandfather, a war hero, built it shortly after the American Revolution. One version says that Saucy Jack lost a plantation in a late-night poker game, when he literally bet the house and lost. Winner of that game was William Baynard, who already owned more than one plantation around the area. He was a wealthy man and lived in a house with his wife and children from 1840 until his death in 1849. He died in the house and was laid to rest in the family's mausoleum that was located not far away. During the Civil War, it's believed Union soldiers used the big house for a headquarters. It subsequently got raided and burned by the Confederates. William was known to be a very wealthy plantation owner. Union soldiers heard rumors about how the mausoleum was filled with gold, jewels, and other valuables. So they broke in to steal the goods. Perhaps that's why some visitors to the plantation after dusk or nightfall have reported seeing the ghost of William wandering the property. Others report seeing his funeral procession and a horse-drawn carriage hearse through the property and past his house. Whatever people see or experience, it's enough to earn the plantation and trails leading to and from it the reputation of being one of the more haunted spots on Hilton Head Island. Ghost Treasure of Folly Island. The story goes that when the Civil War broke out, a young soldier was told to gather all the people and bring them in, off Folly Island. When he got to a particular rundown shack, he found an elderly black woman and her child living there. She didn't want any part of leaving her home and told the soldier of the time she lived in her house. She told him of the pirates who had come ashore to bury 6 chests of gold, silver, and other valuables. She even showed him the 2 oaks that the treasure was buried between. She also told him that when they had gotten all the treasure inside the hole, that the captain buried a knife in one of his crew and threw him upon the treasure itself. The soldier became curious. He wanted to make sure that he was sure of the location. But the old woman told him to leave the treasure alone because there was a pirate watching that treasure, whether he was dead or not. Later that night, the soldier and a friend went to the treasure, and the more they dug, the higher the winds came and the closer the lightning did, until it became so bright that before them stood the silhouetted figure of a pirate. Needless to say, the treasure remained buried, and the story would have too, but for the soldier who told it at a reunion, and another man must have just put it in print. The Legend of Julia Legare. Back in the mid-1800s, Julia was visiting family on the island. She became ill and slipped into a coma. Her family anxiously awaited the day that she would wake up, but that day never came. The family's physician declared the young girl dead. The child was lovingly dressed for her funeral, where loved ones would pay their one last goodbye, or so they thought. In those days, long before the deceased were treated with embalming fluids to preserve the body for burial, the ceremonial activities surrounding death were conducted at a rapid pace in order to avoid the inevitable decomposition. Poor Julia was buried the same day of her death, after loved ones had a chance to pay their respects. Her body was taken from the church and interred in the family's mausoleum. After she was placed inside the crypt, the marble door was closed, securely locked, providing a sense of finality to the tragic death of a child. Julia's family went on with their lives as best as they could after suffering the loss of a child so young. And in time, the pain of her death was replaced with happy memories of her life. After 15 years had gone by, another family death required the mausoleum to be opened. It was when the family realized the tragic error they had made. Julia's remains, which had so long ago been entombed, were crumbled at the foot of the mausoleum's door. She had been buried alive. It is thought that her respiratory and heart rates had dropped so precariously low that they were undetectable by the family and physicians. So they declared her dead. When she was interned that fateful day, she was merely still in her coma and not dead. This led to the horrible realization that she had woken up in her own tomb next to the entombed remains of long-dead family members, where she was unable to escape, and had to wait for her actual death to come and set her free of the terror that she had woken up to. The girl's remains were entombed once again, as were those of the relatives whose death led to this grim discovery, and the door was securely closed again. Still reeling from that horrible discovery at the mausoleum, the girl's family members visited the cemetery to pay their respects. When they did, the door was open. Thinking that the door had to have opened as a result of being improperly secured, they shut the door again and walked away. A few weeks later, a clergyman at the church saw the door was open and ordered it to be closed. This happened again and again and again throughout the decades. Chains and unbreakable locks were used to keep it sealed tight, but it would always break and the door would open. As little as 50 years ago, a door was put on it that could only be removed by industrial heavy machinery, and the door was also opened. That's when everyone gave up trying to close the door. To this day, the original door is nothing more than a broken marble that sits in the grassy doorway of the tomb. Now that there is no door to the JB mausoleum, it is thought that Julia's spirit can rest. But there are still some who say that she guards that mausoleum just to make sure that nobody dare get the notion to put a door back on. Visitors head out to the church every year just to walk over the cemetery and take a look at the mausoleum and walk inside. Some report feeling the essence around them, and others claim to have captured images of her on their camera. As for what Julia thinks of it, it seems as though she's just fine with people visiting the tomb. Just don't think about shutting the door. Lavina Fisher. Operating in the early 1800s, the 6-Mile Wayfair House, so named because it was 6 miles outside of Charleston, South Carolina, developed a local reputation as a popular place for travelers to rest on their way to Charleston. However, the local authorities began to catch a whiff of something untoward when people noticed a few too many of the patrons would check in but never seemed to check out. According to the legend, Lavina greeted travelers at the door and ushered them into the living area, where she would begin to question them about themselves, their lives, and their business. Based on the answers, she and her husband determined which guest had enough valuables to make robbing them worthwhile. For the chosen victims, Lavina provided them with a cup of tea containing a poison or sleeping agent strong enough to force them to quickly retire to bed. Unfortunately, the Fishers had customized the bed in the room to fall through the floor, dropping its occupant onto a specially crafted spiked room lying underneath the house. To add to the macabre, John finished off anyone who survived the poison and the fall. Subsequent investigations revealed that the Fishers dispatched of hundreds of people in this gruesome manner. Several versions of the infamous couple's downfall exist in popular folklore. One version asserts that the town father decided to investigate the disappearances and formed a posse to search the road. When most of the exploratory group returned to Charleston, the posse left one man, David Ross, to stand watch along the road. That night, 2 people in the Fishers gang ambushed Ross, beating him and dragging him to where the gang had gathered. The story goes Ross recognized LaVonna and begged her to help him. Instead, she started choking him and putting his head through a window. During the struggle, he managed to escape and made it back to Charleston to alert the authorities. Another version of this legend focuses on a man named John Peebles. On his way to Charleston from Georgia, he decided to stop at the 6 Mile House. LaVonna and John Fisher set the usual trap, with LaVonna telling him the room wasn't quite ready, while offering him a meal and a chance to rest. She asked Peebles the standard questions about his life and work. He did not enjoy the tea, but he didn't want to seem rude to his host. When LaVonna offered him a cup, he accepted and poured it out when she wasn't looking. The questions continued, and Peebles eventually began to feel uncomfortable with the line of questioning. He also heard people moving around in other rooms, despite his host's assurance that they were alone. After a while, LaVonna informed Peebles that the room had become available. Already suspicious, he accepted the room, but he elected to sit in a chair by the door instead of sleeping in the bed. In the middle of the night, he woke to see the bed falling through the floor right in front of him. He leapt out the window and ran to the authorities rather than sticking around to see what else they had planned for him. On the day of their scheduled execution, John Fisher accepted the counsel of a local reverend and attempted to repent in hopes of a last-minute commutation. He told the gathered crowd that he was a Christian man and he should not be put to death. Terrifying to the end, LaVonna arrived at the gallows in her wedding dress, clinging to the hope that, as a married woman, she could not be hanged. Neither ploy worked. The judge presiding over the execution simply stated that John would hang first. Though the law forbid the execution of married women, the law had no rules against hanging widows. The press reports at the time recorded LaVonna's uttered chilling last words before she leapt from the scaffold on her own, rather than allowing the hangman to do his job. Before she jumped, she yelled, "If you have any message you want to send to hell, give it to me. I'll carry it." Hey ghouls, someone pointed out that I forgot South Carolina, and you were correct. I totally did. I don't know why. I think it's because when I was searching for South Carolina, there were quite a bit that were very similar, like the Boo Hag and the Lizard Man and Third-Eyed Man. Very similar to North Carolina. So I probably started researching it, and I was like, oh, I did this already. But I didn't. So I found 5 more, and I hope you enjoyed them. I did my best. LaVonna is my favorite because she's a freaking badass. I mean, come on. Tell me what you want me to tell the devil, and like, boy, I'll tell him. Probably me if I was alive in the 1800s, to be honest. But yeah, I hope you ghouls enjoyed it. And as always, the last video will be on the top left. The next video will be on the bottom left. All my social media is on the screen, as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone or something watching you.